I'm going to be talking a little bit about writing video games and not so much about the writing itself, more about what the job actually entails when you're working as a writer on a video game. Sort of my, actually I'll just talk a little bit about myself. My name is Mikko Rautalahti, and I work as a narrative lead at Remedy Entertainment. I worked on games like Alan Wake and Quantum Break, among a bunch of others. So we do fairly story-heavy and narrative-driven, character-centric games at Remedy, and that's kind of the perspective I'm coming from. The reason I'm talking about this is actually the second time I'm giving this talk. This is a slightly shorter version of the one I did a couple of months back at the East Coast Game Conference. They give you 1 hour, Ropecon gives you 45 minutes. So if I suddenly just start kind of blasting through the slides, that's when I realize that, oh crap, I'm not gonna make it. Fair warning. But I did drop a couple of slides and we should be okay. Except I'm wasting time on this right now, so time management, important skill right there. So the reason I'm kind of talking about this is that it's kind of my experience that these days people understand that games are written by people. They don't actually know what that entails at all. There's this very romantic idea of the writer as this sort of creative, possibly even genius, but more like just some kind of a word monkey who keeps on banging at the typewriter, and out comes the story, and then the story is handed off to somebody else who actually makes it into a game, which is sort of true, but not actually how it works at all. That's sort of like a very Hollywood approach to things, where typically the entire industry is kind of driven by stories, in that studios are constantly looking for new scripts that they can turn into stories, and the machine doesn't actually start working until you have a script, which is not how game industry works at all. There's this a very classic way of making games, and it's not as common anymore, but I still say that more than half of all the video games we play are kind of produced like this. You have the dev team work on a game, they sort of maybe get 50% through with it, and then they go they have some idea of what it's about story-wise, but they don't really think about it too much, and they design it halfway through, and they go well, I guess we should now get a writer in to story it up a little bit. And that's kind of how you get very bad storytelling. The story itself might be okay, but the storytelling is most likely going to be really bad, because at that point the writer's ability to actually affect anything is very limited. They've already done half the work, and if they actually have to go back and change everything, that's time that they haven't really budgeted for, and everybody's very attached to what they've already done. It's not a great way of making stories for games. Sometimes you get lucky, but most of the time you don't. My perspective is kind of, I guess you could call this the Remedy way, although we're not the only company that works like this. We make sure that the writer is involved pretty much right from the beginning of the project, wherever it might be. So even when we're just concepting, when we make sure that the writer is a part of it, is generally driving at least parts of it, although not the whole thing. And it's more of a collaboration, and working like that, we can make sure that once actual production begins, everybody's kind of working on the same thing, more or less, and you get better results that way. The stories work better, the storytelling is better. The classic example of the result of a game that's kind of made the old-fashioned way is a game where during gameplay the story doesn't actually go anywhere, nothing really happens, and everything, all this actual story progress happens in cutscenes. And what actually happens during the game is something that seems kind of unrelated, you're shooting at a bunch of guys, then you get a cutscene about how you're saving the realm from the orcs or whatever, and then you kind of go back to shooting people in the face, and it's okay, I guess I'm now saving somebody, but I don't know why or how, and no actual progress happens during the game. Whereas our games tend to be the sort where during gameplay the story is actually progressed at the same time, and what you're actually doing during the gameplay is something that supports the story and is a part of the actual storytelling. So what this kind of means is that if you want to make a game that has a good story, you actually have to commit to the idea of telling a game that has a story. This is something that I think a lot of companies, I would pretty much go so far as to say that every game company right now that has any kind of narrative content in their game is very happy to say that yes, we care about story. Story is very important, because why would you ever say that it's not? It's sort of like saying like, yep, we're gonna make something that's kind of shit because we don't care about it. Like nobody's really gonna say that. But it's something that's easy to say. But if you actually want to see it happen, that means that you have the budget for it. You actually have to say that yes, in order for us to make the story work, we're probably gonna have to spend another couple of months to make sure that everything works the way it should. And that's something, that's a little bit harder when you have like, deadlines to meet and schedules to keep and miles to go before you sleep, which is kind of how it goes. But yeah, like stories don't happen by themselves. Like somebody actually has to make them, and that's something that takes time. So you actually have to go like, yes, we will make this happen, and that will slow down everything else. Because when you're building a narrative for a game, it's all about iteration. You will come up with like a first version of a story. For example, in Alan Wake, by the time I like the project was running, like all told, I think Alan Wake took like 6 years to make, which was a long time. I was there for the last 2, and during that time we actually made the game that people ended up playing. Before that, there was a bunch of different versions of it, and even in the time when I was there, we made a bunch of different versions of the story. But the version that we ended up with was pretty much completely unlike any of the prior versions of it. And we kept on trying different things, and some of those worked and some of them didn't. Now, I'm not saying that it has to take 6 years. Like that, I think it's fair to say that that's not a sign of everything going exactly the way it should. So, learn from mistakes, I guess, because we made Quantum Break in only 5. But, then again, that was a game about time travel, and time travel gets very, very complicated if you actually care about the logic of it. And yeah, not that it was, it didn't take a long time because we had a complicated story. It took a long time because it was a game for, a console that didn't exist once we started planning it, all sorts of things like that. But, like the story design was a big part of that. And if you actually want to make something well, you have to create something, you have to look at it and evaluate it, and then you have to make changes and make it better, and then you find out, oh, we fixed that, but that caused a problem elsewhere, now we have to fix that problem, and you just keep on going over and over and over it. And that's kind of like how you make anything good, really. Like it's no different from, if you want to learn how to cook a thing, the first time you try it, it's probably not going to be that great. But the third or fourth time, you're probably kind of got the hang of it. The thing is, though, if you actually have people coming in for dinner in like 5 hours, and it takes you 3 hours to cook it, I guess, you can only do it a limited number of times. So you might, I know people who prepare dinners like that where they actually start 2 batches sort of at different times and kind of get the first one going first, and they'll see how it's going, and then make the real one. These are things that some people actually do just to kind of make sure they don't fuck up. And that's kind of what game development is like too. And if you want to be good at it, you just have to practice, or iterate, as we call it in development, because that sounds better than oh, we don't really know how to make a game, we're just practicing, because publishers don't like that, it turns out. But yeah, it takes time, and not just your time. It's something that if I have to spend an extra week figuring something out, that's important, but it also means that everybody else in the team needs to kind of do something for a week, because they need to also be showing progress. So this is something that you kind of have to understand when you're creating the schedule in the first place. There is a practical issue about writing for games. You kind of need to write stuff. It's just how it goes. But on the other hand, you have, for example, at Remedy, on Quantum Break, I was working with over 100 other people. And I would say, without exaggeration, at least 30 or 40 of those people always wanted something from me. And they wanted me to explain, how is this scene supposed to work? We have the dialogue for it and we have description, but what's the sort of beat by beat description? What is actually supposed to happen here? So they want to sit down and they want me to talk through the whole thing. Or somebody else is creating, the actual 3D model of a character, and they go well, what should this character look like? What should the character be wearing? You're the writer, you wrote this crap. Tell me. And I'm happy to do that. But the thing is, if there's 30 of those people, and let's say that I have to speak to 5 of them on any given day, and each one of those conversations takes a half an hour on average. That's pretty much, half the day gone already. And in order for me to actually write something, like I'm not going to be doing any writing in that time. The rest of the day is probably eaten up by people talking about, okay, when can we talk about the thing, because we can't do it today because we have 2 other meetings. So the whole thing just kind of relates to the situation where if I'm writing, they're like, where the fuck are you? We need to talk to you. And if I'm like talking, they're like, well, okay, like great, thank you for this information, but also we need a new draft of the screenplay because we need to be working on this level, and the deadline for that is on Friday. And it's like, well, I can't really be writing it because I am here talking to you about the stuff that you want to talk to me about. Like, I don't really want to be here, you just need me to be here. Which is not something I can really say, but that's kind of what it comes down to. And that really means that there's like this constant balancing act between actually doing the thing that's ostensibly my actual job, writing, and actually supporting the rest of the team. And this is something that is easier when you have a bigger writing team. For Quantum Break, at its peak, we had like 4 writers working on it, and that was easier because we could say like, okay, this week you're going to be the guy who's talking to everybody else about stuff, and the rest of us can actually, produce something. But on the other hand, like the project I've been working on recently, I've been the only writer on that. That really means that I'm producing something or I'm talking to people, but I can't be doing the same thing at the same time. So you kind of are a bottleneck a lot of the time, and that can be tricky. I mean, it's not a problem as such, because if you are preparing well for this stuff, yep, it's going to take time, and you should plan your schedules accordingly, and that's kind of the grown-up way of doing it. But of course, if there's some kind of a change in project direction, or somebody goes like, hey, we're cutting that level where we also do all the important plot stuff, and the plot can't really change, but we don't have space for it anymore, so please find a way to cram all of that stuff into the rest of the game. And that's the kind of thing where you have to look, well, okay, it's going to take me like a week to work that out. And it's like, okay, but during that week, can you also just help us with all of our other stuff? Which means I guess I'll do my 8 hours at the office now, and then I'll go home and write for another 8 hours. Not sort of coincidentally, I am right now in the middle of a vacation that is 4.5 months, which is a pretty long vacation. Turns out that in Finland there is this thing about how overtime needs to be compensated. So if I put in an extra 8 hours, that's an extra day that I get to be on vacation. Quantum Break, by the way, took a very long time to make. I don't know what the connection is, but there you go. So what exactly does the writer do? What I have here is a list of all the things that I think this is a complete list of the things that I have done or what I do right now. This doesn't really apply to every writer necessarily. I am in a lead position, so that means I have more meetings and more things I need to do. But there's a lot of different things, and some of those are actually about writing, but most of it really isn't. And that's kind of leads me to my exciting joke that is not a joke, which really means that I spend 90% of my time. And I'm not really exaggerating here. I spend 90% of my time in meetings where I tell people why they can't do the things they want to do, and they tell me why I can't do the things I want to do, and then we argue. And at some point we go well, we had an hour for this meeting, so we have 5 minutes left. I guess we need to decide something, and then we kind of find out who's going to be crying, but everything is a compromise. Like nobody can really dictate. And there's times when I can say that no, this is the most important thing in the story, and we can't change that. And then people kind of go okay, if you feel that strongly about it, I guess we'll kind of do it your way and kind of try to make up the time somewhere else. But the thing is, of course, I can't really say that about everything. I have to pick my battles, and that means a lot of time I just have to go I guess we'll just lose the scene that kind of I put my heart and soul into, and I will have a gunfight instead. That's nice. Not that could ever happen. The thing is, you talk to these people about this stuff, and then essentially it turns out that none of what you said actually sticks. And that's not because people are, ignorant of what you do, or they don't care about it or anything like that. It's just that it's kind of not their job to kind of be, in an ideal world, everybody is kind of up to date on what everybody else is doing, but, they have their own deadlines, they have to do stuff, and if Quantum Break, for example, I can't remember exactly how long our screenplay is totally, but it's well over 500 pages, and if we make a new revision of that and change things in various spots throughout the whole thing, and then go hey team, everybody drop what you're doing, here's another 500 pages that you have to read, and it's like mostly kind of the same stuff you read before, but we changed a bunch of things. So kind of really pay attention when you're reading through it. And they go like, yeah, so I'm supposed to do this thing. I need to be finished by 4 o'clock because we have to send the bill to the publisher. Like it's not the kind of thing that they can actually do. So you kind of have to try to find ways of keeping them informed about what you actually do that don't require them to read stuff, because they don't. I mean, they may say that they will, and every once in a while you get some people who actually make it a point to pay attention, either because it's actually their job to pay attention, and that's not everybody's job. Like for example, Evi right here works a narrative designer at Remedy, and it's she's a narrative designer. She actually needs to read the story stuff, so she does. And she'll actually give a crap about that stuff. But a lot of people don't, because they can't. I mean, they will read the scene that they're working on. They will read that, but they don't understand anything beyond that, because they don't. Okay, like this is the thing where the characters come in and then there's an argument and then the monster attacks and then they all get teleported into space. It's an awesome game, by the way. And they know that scene, but they don't know or care about like what happens once they get into space, and they also don't necessarily even know like what's kind of happening like 30 seconds before they enter that room. They just don't have context for anything. And that can be tricky. It's your job to kind of go like, okay, let's all sit down. I'll tell you why we're doing what we're doing. And then you just kind of try to sell them in a way where they kind of understand it and kind of feel excited to do it. And it's not like a very sexy part of the job. Like it's not where you kind of get to be the creative genius, but it's the kind of thing where you either do it or, you cry. Because the thing is, I can't really do any of the cool stuff in a game. Like I can write good dialogue, and I can talk to the actors, I can direct them, and I can make them say it in a nice way. But I can't actually put it in the game because I don't know how. I can't do the animation for the characters because I don't know how. I can't script it in the levels because I don't know how. I can't even make coffee because I drink tea because I'm a gentleman. But it's like I can't actually do any of this stuff. So I really need to be nice to these people and kind of like try to make them understand why these things are worth doing, because they're the ones who make me look good. And the thing is too, like if I write a really good story and it's implemented badly, nobody is, when you kind of look at the fan reaction or the media reaction, they aren't really going to look and go like, yes, I feel like the story is actually very well written, but it's implemented very poorly, so the writer is probably innocent. Like they don't think that way. They just go, yeah, that writing didn't work. Like it just wasn't good, because they don't understand, my pain. And also they don't care about it, and they shouldn't. Like it's not the audience's job to kind of like try to debug the game and go like, well, yes, clearly this part was actually done well, it's just implemented poorly. No, like that's not, nobody thinks like that, and it's too much to ask of anybody. I mean, it'd be nice, but. So this kind of comes down to this kind of like a sad fact, which is great for anybody who is not actually that good at writing, but is really good at working with other people, like myself. Now I'm like okay, but like if you are a writer who is not that great at writing but is actually really good at working with the rest of the team, the end result is going to be way better than if you have somebody who is like a real goddamn creative genius, like some kind of like I don't know, like a writer with magic fingers and like a brain that also has like a main line to like the voice of angels or whatever. Like you can have all that, but if you can't actually tell the rest of the team what they should be doing and also talk them into actually wanting to do that, the end result is not going to be very good. Which is in some ways kind of depressing, because it kind of means that your genius or talent or dedication isn't really kind of like it doesn't define how good the end result is, which can be a little bit depressing. On the other hand, it means that if you have a sort of mediocre idea, it does mean that the end result can still be very great, like engaging, fun for the audience, if you just kind of manage to put it in right. And I mean, there's a lot of films like that, like that we all know aren't necessarily like great stories or super smart films, but there's something like, I don't know, Ocean's 11, not a smart film really, like it's kind of stupid, but it's got flow, everything works, you get some nice jokes and there's like Brad Pitt without a shirt on, so it works. I think there's one scene like that. Not that I know. Also, this kind of like a personal opinion, very appropriate for this particular venue, obviously, is something when I was talking about this at ECGC, there were some people who were like, why? But here I would imagine that everybody is, kind of at least like slightly familiar with role-playing games. And that's kind of where it's at. Like a lot of the writing you do is really based on similar kind of thinking when you're actually running an RPG. You have to anticipate the way people react to things. You kind of want to set up scenes where the most obvious thing that the players are going to want to do is also something that the game can respond to. It's pretty basic stuff, but it really changes the way you kind of think about this stuff. This is also something that there are a lot of great writers who just don't know how to write for games at all. And if you want to kind of learn how to do this, running games is kind of one of the best ways to do it. So yeah, you can't just be a good writer. You actually have to understand the processes. Like I said, I can't do any of this stuff. Like I'm not. I mean, I'm reasonably technical in that if my computer goes, I know what to do about it. I know, like, I can install Windows all by myself. I'm a grown up. I've been messing around with computers all my life. But at the same time, if I actually have to code something, it's like, no, I can't do that kind of thing. Like I can make basic things happen, but I'm not like a tech head. But I know very well like a lot of details of our technology. Like I know what kind of animation is expensive, for example. Like I know what kind of a scene I write that I can write that we can actually do. And there's a lot of stuff that it can be tiny details. Like there's like this weird rule of thumb that in most games, anything that would be very cheap to do on like a film is very expensive for us, and the other way around. So, for example, if you have a scene where you have like two characters smoking a cigarette and kind of passing it back and forth, for a film, that's pretty much like the cheapest scene you can imagine. Like two actors, very simple. For a video game, the animators go like, "Oh, fuck you!" Like that's bullshit. Like, okay, so you have to actually see them like pass the cigarette, like but like that means that's like a lot of close-up animation work. It's very fiddly, and you have to do stuff like get the smoke coming out of their mouth in a way that doesn't look like a weird particle cloud just like appearing. Like it's very complex, and it's a simple thing. On the other hand, if you want to do something like say blow up a car, which for a film you're doing like a small indie film, somebody goes like, hey, let's blow up a car, and you go like, whoa, we don't have that kind of money. Like we can maybe like have a car like crash very, very slightly so there's no actual damage, and maybe we can throw in like a sound effect so it looks a little more convincing. Like maybe we can just like cut a couple of frames so it looks like a little more violent than it actually is, but that's kind of what we can do. Whereas for a video game, it's kind of like, I mean, the first exploding car might be slightly expensive because you actually have to do it. But after it's like you have an exploding car. It's more like, well, where do you want to put the camera for the exploding car? Like, why not blow like 10 cars? Like, because it doesn't actually make that much of a difference. Like once you have already sort of established that you have a technology for it. So it's a different kind of thinking for a lot of this stuff. There's also a lot of stuff that can depend on what you can do at your particular studio. For us at Remedy, we have great facial animation technology, for example. Like we have this little mocap suit in our basement. It's something that we actually built this quite nice studio that we didn't have for Quantum Break. Like we had like this horrible basement room that had like everything was like literally fixed up out of like gaffer tape and stuff. And it was like, when you're getting in front of cameras, don't touch anything, because if anything moves even a little bit, we have to recalibrate, and that's like 45 minutes. So if you touch it, you die. Like it was like a whole thing. And also there was no air conditioning in the box, and we had to have like super bright lights in there because the system works better that way. And then we had actors in there for like 6 hours straight. There was this one lady who, it turned out, was pregnant. Not a good time for her. We kind of didn't know about that in advance, and she could maybe have told us, but yeah. Anyway, I mean, she was great, but yeah, not like she had to work way harder than anybody should, I think. But I mean, that's the kind of thing. Like, I know for us, like getting unique facial animation is very cheap. Like we can do like stupid amounts of that, and that's very simple for us. So that's a strength I can write to. On the other hand, if I wanted to do something that required like a whole bunch of like custom gameplay animation, where you have like a lot of like body movement, that's something that even though we can do a lot of facial animation, that like body animation isn't something we can do quite as much of. And now I can talk shit about her. Finally, God, just go. She's awful. Yeah, I'm gonna pay for it because I happen to know this being recorded. So, but like that's also the kind of thing like Evie likes to say, and now I'm talking about her for some reason for real. Evie likes to say that she provides the form and I provide the content, and that there's a lot of truth to that. I write the stuff, but she actually implements a lot of it, and that kind of means that if I don't understand what is easy for her and what isn't, it's very hard for me to actually do a good job writing. It's also very hard for her to do a good job, doing her thing. There is sort of this industry-wide, I think, attitude problem when it comes to narrative content in general. And this is something that I think everybody who's ever worked on a LARP or kind of talked about the way we approach LARP or role-playing games in general, where there's like this weird engineering mindset where people are very unwilling to admit that they're working with anything that is in any way related to art. It's just not something that people want to admit to. And I don't know, like I think a part of it is kind of from an insecurity point where they just go like, no, we just got these rules and we just got this thing and we don't need to make it into anything else. That kind of that can be difficult though when you're dealing with something where you're actually supposed to have like an emotional payload. And you can't really say that yes, we will have this deeply affecting emotional and sort of emotionally engaging story, but we will approach it as an engineering project and not talk about all of that lovey-dovey stuff or like touchy-feely hippy-dippy bullshit. Like and if you can't have those conversations with people, it's actually really hard. I mean, if you have a love scene in a game and you have somebody who's like, yes, we have the appropriate amount of polygons for the kiss, and you just go like, okay, can we turn on the passion filter? Like maybe just tweak the vertices a little bit for that. It's a weird thing, and some people kind of, even at this point, kind of like just shut down when it comes to that kind of thing. Like they just want to go like, no, I just want to just tell me what to do, like what the specs are for this thing, and that can be quite tricky a lot of time. Like it's something that as a writer you quite often have to struggle with a little bit, even when you're working at a place where story actually is kind of at a premium, like the kind of thing where we acknowledge it's something that we need to do and we need to kind of do it well. But you can run into situations. Another thing is that game writing is very much like a unique skill set. It's something that not everybody can do, and you can be a great writer, but you still might not be able to write a game. Like I know somebody, for example, who I know is way better writer than me. But when it comes to just like turning out a beautiful phrase or just coming up with a line of dialogue that really just sings, this person is way better than I am at that. Like I admit it. Like it kind of hurts me to admit it, but it's true. Like they're just better. But the thing is, that person doesn't really know how to write a game in a way that actually works. Like they don't understand things like what kind of pacing you actually have to prepare for a game. Like they don't necessarily understand the kind of things where for example, the player is now going forward and now there's like suddenly oh no, get in the door before the door closes, like that kind of or like you have to stop the bad person before they set off the bomb, and when you're dealing with players, they can very easily just go like, no, I'm not gonna do that. I guess I'll just go in the other direction. So it's very easy to kind of like come up with this situation where you set up a hard deadline or a failure condition, and then it's very easy for the player to fail that in a way that isn't actually satisfying. And I mean, you can always just go like, oh, you fucked up, game over, restart. That's a thing that you can do, but you probably shouldn't if you want the experience to be good. And there's lots of different ways to approach this, but if you're a good writer, you kind of have to understand what it's like writing for an interactive medium. And That's tricky. The other thing is, of course, that everybody thinks that they can write. Uh, I, it's one of the things where if I talked about other people's disciplines to their face, the way they talk to me about what I do, I would not be making a lot of friends. Because I mean, if I just walk up to a coder and go like, hey, let me tell you, how to make the graphics really sing, like they just go like, you don't, like you literally can't code a hello world thing, like you are an idiot, like why would we listen to you? But these same people are quite often quite willing to just like assume that because they have had like that all of those arguments about Doctor Who online, like they are now masters of storytelling and they really understand like what works and what doesn't. And that's the kind of thing where you kind of have to sort of navigate a certain kind of shall we say, treacherous waters when it comes to egos and whatnot, which kind of means that you have to be really good at kind of managing your own and also kind of asserting yourself when you have to do it. And it's pretty tricky because, I mean, I know for a fact that there are like certain people here who I know are good writers. I know that there is at least one person in here who knows how to actually write a video game. Right there. I don't know if anybody else here who I know can actually write a video game. And I'd imagine that you can't unless you have actually done it. It's just tricky. And people assume that they kind of can without actually studying it or kind of learning from others' mistakes. So I would say that the sort of general rule as a game writer is that you kind of have to learn how to provide opportunities to people rather than obstacles. Because I am luckily enough in a position where if I go up to somebody and go like, no, absolutely not, like what you're planning to do with this scene doesn't work. It doesn't work with the story we're like trying to create here. That's absolutely not going to work. Like most likely they're going to go like, okay, you feel strongly about it. That's great. But the thing is, if I just, if every meeting I go into is always a no, if I'm always just the person who says no, that means that people, first of all, don't really want to talk to me anymore because I'm constantly, somebody who's like a, the specter of doom that appears in their path. That's not fun. But also it's the kind of thing that doesn't really get you anywhere. And I kind of find that when you are working with a team, the best part of it is the collaboration. And a lot of the people I work with aren't really writers and they might not really know how to write, but that doesn't mean they don't have good ideas. And it doesn't mean that they don't have input and they don't have insight. So you kind of have to be there to listen to what they actually want to do because they are, again, the people who make you look good. If they work on something that they're passionate about and feel good about it, the end result is going to be better, and that means that, I look better. At the same time, though, somebody kind of has to fight for the vision. It's something that I think, in a lot of companies, you have somebody like a creative director who is kind of taking point on that. And that's great if that is a person who is actually invested in the story. We're lucky enough at Remedy that we actually have a creative director, who is also a writer. That helps a lot. They understand this sort of thing. At the same time, in a lot of companies, the creative director is somebody who kind of doesn't necessarily care about the story that much. It's somebody who is more interested in, what's the overall, graphical impression of the game, or what's the more sort of like atmosphere or tone you're going for. And that means that easily you're kind of the only person who is fighting for the vision and the narrative and the storytelling. And that can be a lonely place sometimes. It's the kind of thing where nobody else really cares about that. And you find that okay, it's like I have been told that it's my job to make the story good. And that means that I'm the person who in every conversation has to speak up and go like, no, what you're planning is stupid. It's not a good idea because the story sucks if we do it that way. So you're kind of in this position very easily where you are the only person who is constantly kind of talking shit about everybody else's ideas, and you don't really have an option to not do it because it's your job to do it. That can be a pretty crappy place, and I think that if anybody as a writer finds themselves that position, I hope that they are also kind of have the backing of the higher ups. And have some kind of authority beyond just their position as a writer to kind of actually say these things, because otherwise you are kind of just the naysayer that nobody wants to work with. Sometimes you might be that though, and you still kind of have to say it because the other options just go like, yes, I see we're now making a game with a shitty story. I guess I'll just make it bad. I'll just turn in bad work that I don't actually believe in. I'm not like passionate or interested in. It's just That's not a great position to be in. I kind of, as an idealist, I'd like to say that it probably would be better to just kind of fight it until they fire you. As a man who has a mortgage, I also think like, well, I also like to pay my bills though. So I don't know. It's not something that I've really had to deal with being at Remedy, but I know a lot of writers who actually have had to struggle with this quite a bit. And usually it's the kind of thing where they start out in a project where everybody's excited, and then 6 months later, you know, the grinder has done its work, and then they're like, oh, this is my life now. So I'm blasting through this way faster than I thought I did, but like what I kind of this sort of my final thought here actually is kind of like the sort of process of creating something with other people is really cool. It's something that if you just want to be, you know, some kind of a lone creative genius, you can always write a book. Like that's an option. I mean, it's a lot of hard work, but then you can decide how everything works out. When you're working on a game with a team, though, you, even if you are doing something that's very sort of fundamentally important to the overall experience, you can't do any of it yourself, and somebody else is always coming with ideas that make your work better. And that's pretty great. Like it's once you realize that, okay, there are like these people around me and I can trust their judgment, that they really understand what I'm trying to do here, that end result can be pretty great, but the process can be even greater. Like as a writer, you can learn a lot from it. And when you just have these people who are working together and are really into the project they're working on, that's pretty great. Like you get this buzz that's kind of hard to define. And I would say that the closest I have ever come to that is actually when I've been working on a LARP with a bunch of other people. When you kind of, you know, it's like 11 p.m. and everybody's really into what they're doing, and you know the game is coming up in like 3 weeks and you're not really done yet, but you know you're gonna get there, and you just go like, oh my god, it's gonna be so good. And you know, once you get into that mindset, it's pretty great. Of course, the downside is that it is 11 p.m. and some people have kids and they haven't seen, you know, their parents for like 15 months now, and people have like scurvy at that point. You know, there's like a dead body in the stairwell, and they just go like, just step over it. Like we don't have time to clean this up now. Like the milestone is coming up, and also we have publisher visit, and they want a brand new demo, and yeah. So I guess we're pulling some long hours now. Yeah. So that's kind of it. I am super fast because this is actually my last slide, which means that we have, I don't know, like 10, 15 minutes if people have questions or anything like that. Yeah, in the back.
If someone is masochistic enough to still love to work in the industry, what do they need to do? Do you have like a portfolio, or what do you do to get into that job?
I knew somebody was going to ask this, and I was like, what am I going to say to that? Because it's tricky. Okay, so first of all, like it's absolutely possible to get a job in this industry, as evidenced by the fact that somebody was dumb enough to hire me. And like that's partly a joke and not really a joke, which seems to me like half my content is like, here's a horrible joke, haha, it's not a joke. But I mean, I have zero education, pretty much. I never did anything particularly useful in my life. I learned a lot about the X-Men, you know. Like I played role-playing games and I watched Star Trek and I learned English. That was like a key thing because all the work we do is in English. And then at some point it kind of turned out that you know all of this stuff and the fact that I was really into games and I like writing because I'd been writing all my life. Just kind of turned into a thing where I saw this job. Actually, that's not quite true. I didn't see the job ad. My friend Markus there saw the job ad and he was like, hey, you should really apply. And I was like, no, they're never going to hire me. And, you know, a month later, I was like, oh, they just hired me. So, you know, that happened. But that was like, that's not a plan. Like, that's just dumb luck. Like you can't really like approach it like that. So here's what I think you should do. First of all, just like, and this kind of applies to any job in the game industry. Like, you know, like one thing, for example, like we have, you know, we are hiring quite a few people right now. There is actually one writer position open right now. I will say before like people just like rush into like go for it. It's a senior position. It will not be anybody's first writing job or like anybody's first game industry job in general. It just can't be. Because you need experience. And of course, then you get in this whole thing about like, well, I don't have experience, but I can't get a job because I don't have experience, you know. What you can do though is you can put together a portfolio. Nobody's going to look at it. And that's not because like we don't care, like because we just hired another writer and we had like 200 applicants and I had to kind of say no to a whole bunch of very promising like very skilled people. And also a whole bunch of people who had like no business applying whatsoever. Like we had some people who were just like, hello, I like a job. Can I get 50,000 a month, please? And it's like, and that's it, you know.
And
So
you forgot that he said he was a badass.
yeah, we had some characters, but it's the kind of thing where like you know. Nobody's really going to look at your portfolio unless you actually make it through at least like one sort of like level of filtering, because there are so many applicants and also although there are writer positions available, they are kind of rare. Like you know, for a major game project, you're gonna have like 5 level designers, you know, 4 artists, a bunch of animators, you know, might even have a couple of narrative designers, but most likely you're just gonna have 1 or 2 writers, maybe just 1. And for a lot of companies, even that one writer might not be like an actual staff member, it's a contractor they get in to kind of work on the game a little bit. Which means that it's really hard to actually kind of get in that sort of like a first, you know, get that first opportunity to do something. But the portfolio does help, because once you actually get through like the first layer of filtering, that's when people want to ask for writing samples. They want you to do stuff for them, and that helps a lot. I think the most important thing you can do is actually write games, and that means I mean it could be like a Twine game. You could go to game jams. Like it doesn't have to be like a professionally published game, but it does need to be something that is like an actual game project that has been completed, and you can go like, yes, I have worked on this stuff, I have passion, and you can see how this works. If you are not involved with the Finnish chapter of IGDA, the International Game Developers Association, I strongly suspect that, recommend. Wow, that was weird. I recommend that you get involved with that, because there's a lot of people who are actually just making games, and even indie games, even if they're kind of, you know, sort of held together with like spit and baling wire, they do count. And once you have any kind of experience, any kind, like that changes things, because most of the applications we get are from people that we reject right away because they have never worked on a game before. And it's like, they don't really know what they're applying for at all. So yeah, they're in the back. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, if you have a small game, you probably don't have a dedicated writer. So yeah, it's always going to be different, but and it also depends on the studio. So you know, it's like I'm talking very much from my perspective. I know that many writers have very different situations. At Remedy, I think we have 138 people now. 145. Okay, I've been off a little while, so we've hired new people. Yeah.
I was actually going to go in a bit on the sort of small studio aspect. How relevant of a sort of plan would you see the idea of wearing many hats, or like branching other skills as well as writing, if you have any?
Well, I mean, definitely, if I could do game scripting, for example, that would be very advantageous for me. Like I could actually go and implement some of my scenes myself. Like that's something that, you know, then I could make sure that they're the way I want them to be. It's also something that probably would make me more attractive to an employer. I do have other skills besides writing. I have planning skills. I can direct actors. I can, you know, do all sorts of things. But my technical skills are pretty weak. I mean, it's worked out for me, but I don't recommend it. The more you earn. On the other hand, most of the writers I know who work in this industry can't code for shit. So, you know, yeah.
Since I know you have prior experience with pen and paper game design and being published there, do you think that would be a potential way in for somebody who wants to get into the industry, since the barrier of entry is so much lower in that field?
Well, I mean, when I kind of applied at Remedy, the first actual interview I had was with 3 people, and all of them were like role-playing game nerds. And at the time I was the editor-in-chief of the Roolipelaaja magazine. So that probably didn't hurt. So I mean every like bit of design experience you might have is always going to be useful. Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your writing. Is there something in the games you've written for that where you are proud of the writing, or you think that you're happy with how it came out after the team process? Or some examples of what kind of stuff are you proud of or happy
Well, like all writers, if I look at anything of mine that is older than maybe 2 or 3 years, I just cringe hard, I think that's a good thing because it means that I have improved since that time. I mean, if I look at something I wrote like 5 years ago and go, yeah, this is awesome, I probably like haven't actually gotten any better in those 5 years, which is not great. But yeah, there's a bunch of stuff we did. From one of my favorite bits is these live action videos we did for Alan Wake's American Nightmare, which is a tiny game, but we did those with Ilkka Ville, who plays Alan Wake, and we just shot I think 9 of these, essentially like series of like short films that I wrote, and he kind of went to town on, and that was pretty cool stuff. And it was something that I wrote it, but none of it was really relevant until somebody actually acted it and shot it and directed it. So yeah, that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Can you give a comment on the relationship between the writer and the player, the audience, being an interactive medium? Does that affect how you feel about players?
Sorry, does that?
Yeah, does that affect the process or your? Do you have a relationship to the player as you write?
Well, I do think about how the player would experience this, absolutely. Beyond that, it is an interactive process, but the interaction really begins once I'm already hands off. So, all I can do is kind of do best guesses. But it's something you absolutely have to think about. If you just like write a scene a certain way and you expect it to work a certain way and you don't think about how the player might react, then you're just writing a scene for a film. Right. And you really have to think about, what the player would be interested in doing here, like what kind of technical solutions we might use here to kind of make this more interactive. That's definitely a thing. I think we have time for, well, let's say a couple more. Yeah.
So any words of wisdom related to working with third parties? You mentioned publishers briefly, but how would you effectively communicate your storytelling, what you're trying to do with your game when you're working with a publisher or maybe a subcontractor? Does that get different? Because internal communication is always easier than external.
For sure, yeah. Working with publishers, it really depends on the publisher and your relationship with them. For example, like we made Alan Wake and Quantum Break with Microsoft, and one good thing about that was that we had a long relationship with them and we understood how they work. And that also meant that when we were talking to them about stories, that we knew how to present it, and we did have to kind of create like custom-made presentations for them. And that was like, look, we know that you're going to be asking about this stuff, so we're going to be hitting these points. I think it's a little bit trickier when it's if it's like an outsourcing partner, because quite often you can't actually ship them all of that material. I mean, they're NDA'd, but you can't just like start sending out builds of the game willy-nilly like that. The risk of leaking is way too high. So you quite often have to really sit down and try to explain it to them, and that might be a Skype call or something like that, but just kind of explain what you need as closely as possible, and then hope that you have like an actual iteration loop that produces good results, and then you just cross your fingers and hope for the best, which may or may not work out nicely. Yeah.
You mentioned that writers are sometimes used as a kind of contractor to the whole game project, but how much do you use kind of outside contractors yourself, experts on different fields of life, or do you rely on your own experience?
We do use, it kind of depends on what we're working on. For example, the last project I worked on had like a more of a military thing, and that meant that we did kind of consult people that have like more military experience, because I don't have any. Like I am a stone cold killer, obviously, but but not an officially trained one, which makes it better. We also have like drama consultants, for example. Like there are people that we kind of just call and go like, hey, here's our stuff. Like, could you read through this and tell us what you think? But it's also important, like when you get feedback from somebody, you have to be able to evaluate it, because you might get feedback. Somebody goes like, no, this is not how it works in real life, and that may be irrelevant to what you're actually doing. Like just realism in itself is not very interesting, but if it's something that actually serves the purpose, then you have to take it seriously. Yeah.
How relevant is exactly that skill set? strength, but is it enough to be a full kind of area of expertise that hardware?
Well, it might be, but it kind of depends on what we're doing. You know, if it's the kind of thing where we're doing something that had like a very big focus on folklore, yeah, like then you might be somebody we would like talk to. Like for Quantum Break, we consulted with Syksy Räsänen, who is a physics professor, and he made sure that the time travel we have in Quantum Break, although obviously fictional, is still it's something that like its basics are actually based on actual scientific theories. I mean, I'm not gonna say that's how time travel works, but it's based on a model of time travel where the logic is sound. So and that's something and we got a lot of terminology and stuff like that for him. On the other hand, we have another person we use, the drama consultant, is actually like a drama professor, somebody who's actually been teaching this stuff for a long time, and that's something that is also useful. But it really kind of depends on all kinds of things. And I would say that most of the time when we end up consulting with somebody, it's somebody that we already know or a friend of a friend, because then we just go like, oh, I wish somebody would tell me, wait a minute, I know a genius physicist, like why don't I just ask him? And he goes like yes, I will absolutely do this, and also I like money, so let's do one more. Yeah.
Do you have a method or way of actually managing all the alternative storylines? Because given that game writing, in that sense, is a completely different field from other writing. So do you have a specific method or a way to actually manage all the alternative storylines?
You mean like the branching content when a player makes yeah. We there's something called a notepad, which is not something I would recommend, but we have a lot of experience with that. For Quantum Break, we had a very messy way of doing it. Like traditionally, our games don't have. I haven't had like that much in the way of like branching content. There's been a little bit of it, but not a lot. Quantum Break was kind of bigger. Like it gave you these so-called junction moments where you could make a decision, and then the entire plot of the game kind of went into a different controlled direction. But we only had like 4 of those major moments in there. So that was something where we kind of didn't really have a system. We kind of did all of it manually, which is very error prone and hard to test and kind of crappy. We now actually have tools that kind of let us track that kind of stuff. So we have this writing tool that we are in the process of finalizing, and that actually lets us do that kind of thing better. So we can actually do a thing where we can have the screenplay in this software, and we can just go like, okay, activate these choices, and then we can see what that version of the story would look like. And it's also something that helps with testing, because our testers can then go like, activate choice like 1A, 2B, 1A, or like 3A or something like that, and then they get that version of the game, which is useful. Yep, okay, we're done. This man will kick my ass if I don't go, so yeah.